Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started in a second for our Property Resilience Assessment for CPACE Financing webinar. So hold tight. We'll give it one minute or so to get people in, and we'll get started. Thank you. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for attending our first webinar, probably one of many, to discuss how the Property Resilience Assessment process can really help basically create a lot more opportunities for CPACE financing and for measures included in CPACE financing. So I'm Abigail Johnson, and my panelists here today are Damien Walk from PGIM Prudential and Holly Niebuhr from AEI Consultants. Before we move on to going over a little bit about CPACE and the details of the guide, I just wanted to give you kind of an agenda for today. So we will, we assume most people on this call have some familiarity with CPACE, but if not, we'll just go over it for a few minutes, talk about how it relates to resiliency, and then hand it over to Holly and Damien to go over the ASTM guide and standard, and then discuss some of the stages of resiliency and some of the impact you can have using resiliency measures for your building. I think we have a pretty broad range of different kinds of organizations joining us today, by the way, from practitioners to lenders, to property owners, to program administrators, and other supporters. So we're excited about everyone getting an overview of this. Just really briefly on who we are. We're the Virginia PACE Authority. We administer the CPACE program for the state of Virginia. We've been working for a number of years in trying to bolster resiliency in Virginia, and are part of the work group that Holly, our leader, our fearless leader, put together a number of years ago and has successfully gotten the standard off and running and published. Basically, we and through our partner organization, Abacus, have been around for a long time, about since 2013 in the CPACE world, have seen a lot of changes and a lot of good things. Primarily, the thing we're going to talk about today is how resiliency is allowed in a number of states, which really brings the opportunity to make better buildings, less risky buildings, and retain value for buildings. We run the statewide program in Virginia with our partner Slipstream, who are also on the call. And we have a pipeline of about 150 million and have closed about 16 million to date. Partner Slipstream, as well as a 501c3 nonprofit, and administer programs in the US. So just really quickly, I think a lot of you have heard of this, but what CPACE is, it stands for Commercial Property Assess Clean Energy, and it's a form of financing where you have it secured by a voluntary special assessment. So it acts like a loan in a lot of ways. It's private financing going to private building owners, but it's secured on the real estate as a special assessment. So what does this mean? It means that basically if you transfer it to a new owner, it doesn't prepay until the end of the loan term unless you want it to. So that's something that's not typical of a regular kind of commercial loan. The private lenders or capital providers structure the financing directly with the borrowers. So that's something that in a lot of ways allows for a lot of flexibility, a lot of ability to negotiate your own terms. There's a variety of capital providers out there, from specialty groups that just do CPACE to small and large commercial banks. Basically, the way you repay your CPACE loan or financing is either collected by the capital providers themselves or by the jurisdiction in which your property is located. This depends on the state and the program. It's also enforced, similar to a property tax. Special assessments that are secured are, enforced in the same way as property taxes, and that is either enforced by the locality or the capital provider, again, depending on where you are and the program. And in every commercial program, almost all of them require the consent of existing mortgage holders, or if they don't, like in California, most CPACE lenders ask for that because it makes it more secure. There's not issues going forward. One other thing to talk about PACE and what makes it attractive is that it typically provides 100% financing of eligible projects and properties. Most of those, I'm kind of giving a broad overview for most programs in most states. There are some differences, of course, among states, but typically there's a wide range of eligible measures. They almost always include energy efficiency, renewable energy, and water efficiency or conservation. Many allow for resiliency, and some allow for other kinds of improvements like environmental remediation, EV charging, indoor air quality, clean water, things like that. So there's really a very broad stormwater management, broad range of measures. Most programs that are a commercial PACE allow for pretty much any kind of property type, with the exception of residential, which is typically classified as 1 to 4 units. Typically, they're fixed rates and they're fully amortizing up to 25 to 30 years. Again, they can be prepaid earlier, particularly if you're dealing with new construction projects, but they're based on the useful life of the improvements typically. Because it is a special assessment and it's not recourse, it's basically staying with the property. And as I said before, you can transfer it to a new owner unless you prepay it. Now let's get to the heart of this webinar, which is exciting, and that's to talk about resiliency. And I will say that in putting together this map, it actually was really surprising how many states are now really have some level of resiliency, which is very exciting, and why this ASTM PRA, the Property Resiliency Assessment, is really important so that we can standardize how we use PACE and resiliency. So every green state is where there are active CPACE programs. So the gray are not active. They may be under development, but they're not active. All the ones that have the check, kind of the boxes, those are ones that have pretty broad resiliency, or at least 5 or 6 types of measures allowed, which means you can pretty much be fairly creative with how you structure a resiliency project. And those that are kind of in that shading, which are 4 states, Oregon, California, Utah, and New Jersey, they allow 1 to 2 typically, or 3 measures for New Jersey, so not quite as broad. But as the panelists and I were discussing earlier, lots of things that are under water conservation or efficiency could be considered in some ways resilient. So just a few examples, which Holly and Damien were going to go into a little later, but some of the things we see often, and I actually went through all of the statutes in the country to look at kind of the main categories that we would see for resiliency and CPACE. And so the ones on the left are the ones we see the most often, which make the most sense if you think about what exactly you want to, how you want to make your building, mitigate the risk from the hazards we see. And on the right are ones that are not always considered necessarily resiliency per se, but that basically are related or have some really good applications that certainly make your buildings, retain their value and are good for protecting the assets in general. Here's a quick, courtesy of Pace Nation, here's a list, a pretty recent list of the number of projects done that have resiliency related improvements. As you can see, the majority of these are seismic related, And if you add seismic with stormwater, almost 92% of them, of the total value of the projects anyway, not the number of projects, are actually those two categories. So what this means is there's a significant opportunity to use CPACE to address all the other kinds of hazards that are out there and all the measures that can be incorporated. So actually, that's I'm going to slide it over to you, Holly.
All right. Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here today. And are you seeing my screen? Everything looking good?
Yes.
Okay, great. So it's great to be here today and connect with the CPACE community. We're hopeful that the Property Resilience Assessment Standard can serve as a helpful tool, as Abby said, to standardize the process of looking at resiliency. So first, a little bit about ASTM. ASTM standards are developed by consensus, by a community balanced between users, such as lenders and developers, and then providers, such as design professionals and consultants. There are over 12,000 ASTM standards in use globally, and some of the most frequent ASTM standards are used in relation to steel, plastics, petroleum, and construction. But most pertinent to this community are the ASTM standards commonly used in commercial real estate. ASTM is a big force in commercial real estate because these standards are commonly used whenever a property is being bought, sold, developed, or financed. The Phase 1 environmental site assessment is especially ubiquitous in commercial real estate. These standards help purchasers avoid liability and ensures all parties are making informed decisions. So right off the bat, we're going to hear from Damien with PGIM Real Estate to talk a little bit. Damien, how does your organization utilize ASTM standards?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the short answer is we use them quite a lot. But a little more detail on that. So I'm the risk manager for PGIM around the world. We have a global footprint of properties in the U.S., Asia, and Asia Pacific, and Europe. And with every transaction we make, whether it's equity or debt, in other words, whether we're buying a property or providing a loan on a property that somebody else is purchasing, we always engage some of these standards that you see listed here. Holly said they're ubiquitous. That's certainly maybe an understatement. We certainly in my role as a risk manager, we're always looking at risk, potential damage or any sort of unexpected loss that a property could incur during our ownership or during the course of a loan that we have on a property. So we take risk management very seriously, and the due diligence process before we close a loan involves these standards. And this is not just something that Prudential does. Pretty much most U.S. lenders of commercial real estate, for example, would engage an environmental phase 1 assessment, property condition assessment, and if it's in an earthquake zone, a seismic assessment, and they would specify these ASTM standards for their due diligence. So it is quite common, very, very active industry for consultants providing these services, and very important in commercial real estate.
Thanks, Damien. So we're going to talk a little bit about why we created this ASTM standard guide, and then we'll get into the guide itself, I promised. So just to kind of back up of why we created this, we started this effort 4 years ago, and we had major lending institutions, real estate investment trusts, and other types of owners and investors, and Abby, all saying like, we're seeing increased interest in understanding the natural hazards or climate risk that might exist at a property or portfolio level, and understanding how to manage those risks. And we're also seeing climate risk data being used for competitive advantage by owners and investors to make acquisition and disposition decisions of where to buy, where to invest, and where to exit. In addition, we're seeing property insurance prices stalling deal making because lenders and rating agencies require a certain amount of insurance, and it may not be possible to obtain in today's market. So it's really a quickly evolving space with a lot of demand for information, a lack of clarity about what is available and how to use it. So in comes ASTM. That's where ASTM standards can really shine by providing that transparency and consistency that's needed in the market. Just a little more background on the insurance front. Research published by First Street recently showed that 39 million residential properties across the US, representing 27% of all properties. This is on the residential side, but still interesting from an insurance perspective. They have insurance premiums that are too low to cover their actual climate risk exposure. This widespread underpricing is creating significant financial pressure on insurance providers nationwide. In fact, in the last few years, insurers have paid out substantially more in claims and expenses than they have collected in premiums, coinciding with a record number of billion-dollar natural hazard events in 23 and 24. These industry-wide losses do not portend great things for property insurance pricing. On the commercial side, these property insurance trends also affect property valuations. Annual cost increases for insurance coverage affect net operating income and therefore can reduce property value. If you can't get insurance, you can't get financing, and insurance is priced annually. So it's really hard to predict, and everyone's having to change their underwriting formulas to project higher future cost increases, but it's very concerning about where property insurance prices will go. So what can we do? We have to make the underlying assets more resilient to reduce the cost of damages to ourselves as property owners, to our communities, and to the insurers. And CPACE has a big role to play in this. In addition to insurance driving a focus on natural hazard events and climate risk, sites like Zillow, Redfin, and Realtor.com provide climate risk information on the residential side. So this is just increasing people's awareness. They're becoming much more aware of these hazards and how the hazards are going to change over time. Of course, reading the headlines every day, you also see a lot of this. So in the commercial real estate space, investors are making acquisition and disposition decisions based on commercially available data from providers like Moody's, Munich Reinsurance, Zurich, First Street. There's a number of them. There's this whole thing called the Wild West of climate data providers. Everyone's out there selling this information to commercial real estate stakeholders who are trying to see the future better than their competitors, right? So these platforms identify which hazards may be elevated for properties and will drive investments in resilience, such as through programs like CPACE. I think that this information becoming more common, combined with what we're seeing in the insurance markets, is really driving attention to resilience and risk management. So Damien, how is this type of data being used at PGIM Real Estate?
Yeah, so again, within the umbrella of risk management, before we invest in a property, we're now, just in the last 2 years, really, we've started to engage, as Holly said, some of these climate model firms that give us these reports on a specific address, and they'll tell us, based on their analyses, if that property is exposed to significant hazards such as, wildfire or hurricane or flood, tornado, landslides. There's quite a long list of potential hazards, but it's very important to us. As I mentioned earlier, hazard risk mitigation is critical to a sound investment. So we've now, and many lenders have started to add climate risk modeling to this repertoire of risk tools they use before we do a transaction.
Thanks, Damien. So to provide just a little more foundation on the development of the PRA standard, we started this process with certain goals. We wanted to develop an umbrella that would encompass multi-hazard evaluations, since that's what most of these climate risk screening products are generating. and really provide a roadmap for people on what actions to take to improve the outcomes for sites that had some vulnerability. And we also wanted to be really respectful of existing methodologies for existing risks. So we do reference seismic resilience standards in the guide, but we do not conflict with them. Seismic is something that you're working on, that process would remain unchanged. We did focus the effort of the property resilience assessment solely on the physical risk side. Things like energy audits and decarbonization studies should certainly be performed concurrently, and the findings combined with decisions on where you're headed. But the ASTM PRA guide is really focused on that physical risk and resilience piece. The PRA can be performed during the design phase prior to construction or for existing buildings prior to renovations. We also want to be really thoughtful about resilience overall as a topic. Resilience is really systems oriented. So having a single focus on just the property itself could be a little misleading, right? Because buildings do depend on infrastructure. The overall community resilience really does play an important role. But we had consensus in the decision makers within the task group that we wanted to provide a process that would provide risk and resilience options for the things under direct control at the property level. So information that property owners, investors, lenders could use, even while being aware of the broader topics such as community resilience and, of course, the sustainability goals, other information that's being gathered, and the insurance and underwriting processes. So there's a lot of intersections here, but when we developed this guide, we wanted it to be very focused. And then also wanted to share with you some of the folks that were involved with our effort, and maybe a little bit about kind of what their interests were in their involvement. You see here the names of those from this owner category. They're thinking about, what will this property be worth when I try to exit the investment? What will my annual income be if property insurance continues to rise or actual damages occur, of course? They're also being asked by their investors and prospective tenants to document their risk management strategies. You know, if you own a bunch of warehouses and you're leasing to someone like Amazon, they're looking for low downtime, right? They want to have continued operations at the building. So these owners are interested in resilience. We also have lenders involved in the effort. They have similar concerns because if a loan defaults, it comes back to the lender, or in the case of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they may hold the guarantee. And of course, we've been happy to have Abby and Virginia Pace involved. I know it's not necessarily technically lending, but it's funding projects, and it's been great to see the CPACE community's interest in this. We hope to have many more of you on this call today. Reach out if you would like to join the task group. We'd love to have your involvement. We also have a number of nonprofits and associations involved in our work, along with research and academia. And of course, the A&E climate risk modeling and consulting community. So for A&E firms and consultants, we're looking to give our clients good advice about how to build assets that are built to last. And again, this is a great opportunity to collaborate with CPACE. I think on the A&E side too, there's a lot of design professionals that are realizing they have some liability if they don't point out future conditions when they're doing design work, especially on new build. So if you're helping your client make decisions for a building that's hopefully going to be there for a while, don't we all have some responsibility to point out future conditions? And I think there's a lot of legal wrangling that's happening right now to understand how design firms are managing that. Okay, so what is the PRA? Here is the actual process in a graphic here. This process is adapted from many similar approaches out there. It's really not rocket science, but it is a consistent approach that provides transparency to the industry. So you can see here, it's a multi-hazard assessment that starts with a screening to identify which hazards may represent a concern, then evaluating the vulnerability at the property level by an engineer or architect, visiting the site and reviewing records. Of course, in the case of future construction, you might not necessarily visit the site. You would be reviewing plans. And then if necessary, based on the hazards that were identified and the vulnerabilities that were identified, recommending resilience measures. In the context of CPACE, the PRA can proactively explore which resilience measures that are supported by the relevant program align with the hazards we're working to mitigate. Abby shared a slide earlier indicating a lot of those things, but certainly flood prevention measures, elevating critical equipment, stormwater mitigation, wildfire prevention measures, wind resistance measures, those would all apply. I know many CPACE programs may specifically support seismic resilience projects, as Abby said, and the PRA fully defers to the existing seismic standards in those cases.
Hey, Holly, can I just, I really appreciate that,
Please.
this slide, I think is really something that I would love, my colleagues in administration and also the CPACE lenders to really look at. Because I think that, for example, if you're a CPACE lender or an originator, or contractor even, you're talking to your building owner, I think, being able to see how you can just understand what your hazards are. It's not, can you just talk, it's not that expensive, I think, to kind of figure that out. And then that would kind of lead you whether or not you want to go down that road of actually hiring someone to do a project analysis together with your energy audit to determine what measures could be financed.
So is your question about the expense of doing a
Yeah.
PRA or?
Yeah, well, the PRA is one thing, but I'm just thinking when you do a PRA, one kind of generally what those, just because I'm thinking about from the perspective of the capital advisor, thinking we already have to do an energy audit. So how can we try to work that in with with also what this has? I think it's very valuable. Obviously, I believe it is, but I don't know if you can speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really more of a mindset than additional expense. I mean, if you're building something anyway, thinking about what the future hazard conditions may be at that site is really just making better, smarter decisions on the features that you're choosing. There may be a slight upfront increase in the materials or the design, but I think long term, the point of it is to retain the building value. And one of the things we get asked a lot about is, if I implement these resilience measures, will I get cheaper insurance? And the insurers are always very careful not to make those kind of commitments because insurance pricing is so complicated. You have inflation, you have availability of materials, you have how many losses have occurred, maybe not even in anywhere near your property. But we do hear consistently that owners of buildings who have demonstrated a responsible approach to risk management and are able to document that they've considered the hazards in the area and have built accordingly will receive best consideration, maybe access to better markets, possibly better pricing. And then there are some states where, like a fortified roof, if the audience is familiar with the fortified program, I believe in the state of Alabama, some other locations, if you utilize a fortified roof, which would give you great results under the PRA assessment, they are required to give more affordable insurance to those properties. So I think there's a lot of return on investment aspects here. One thing I should note is under stage 2, especially for existing buildings, the ideal situation is that the consultant is able to provide some predicted damage, rough order of magnitude damage that could occur in the absence of resilience measures. And then once those measures are implemented, a proposed reduction or a projected reduction in damage as a result. So you'll be able to see how those resilience measures actually benefit the property. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really helpful I mean, I kind of was aware, but I mean, in terms of just how they're looking at, how do I want to look at now, talking to a building owner and what they should be considering in a different kind of a larger optic than just energy efficiency. So thank you.
Right.
Yeah, if I can add to that about the cost for this. Yeah, so obviously at Prudential, we engage this service and pay for it with every transaction. Again, it's just a policy around the world for us. And we see it as a proactive expense that saves us money, as Holly said, in the long run. It becomes obvious once you get one of these reports and it lists in stage 2 the potential damage. It'll list vulnerabilities at your property. You've got rooftop mechanical systems, and it's a high hurricane area, and there's no secure system or tie downs for those, and it'll list the potential cost to repair after the hurricane versus the proactive cost to install, security tie downs for the equipment, or raising the transformers, electrical transformers that are in a floodplain. The cost is there for that. It's real and it has to be paid right away. But the savings, the preventative savings, is enormous. So it's after reading hundreds of these reports, it becomes evident that this is well worth it. The amount of money that you spend. I think Holly's going to talk later on about some of the success stories, properties that have been fortified, that become more resilient, and they've actually it's prevented damage. One last comment is, in some cases, we look at this on a portfolio level too. There's an investor could look at several properties, do just a stage 1 assessment, and identify only those properties that are exposed to high hazards of a certain kind, and then pinpoint, well, let's go to stage 2 and stage 3 for only those properties. And sometimes it's a more cost-effective way to achieve your resiliency goals without doing all 3 stages at every property if you have a portfolio.
That's a good point, Damien. And for the CPACE lenders out there, something to be aware of is the large property owners who have a portfolio. They may be doing that stage 1 screening of their whole portfolio and then thinking about how can I access capital to go to stage 2 and 3, mainly 3. So maybe an opportunity for the CPACE folks out there to think about, oh, these companies are all doing this review right now of their portfolio, and then they're going to take the high risk sites down to stage 2 and 3. All right, so just a little bit more kind of detail on what the PRA is and is not. Of course, we want to begin with understanding the goals and the risk appetite and the resilience goals of the project, which may vary depending on property type. Assisted living facility is going to have different resilience goals than a self-storage facility. So we need to begin with that in mind, as well as if it is a CPACE project, thinking through what the state requirements are. So we're aware of that from the beginning. The PRA requires transparency in the data used. I mean, one thing that we should really be very clear about is when you take those climate risk data models and downscale to a single parcel, there's a lot of uncertainty there. So we really focus on making kind of no regrets moves and investments, but being aware that there is some uncertainty in that data, and the PRA requires transparency about where the data came from, how it was downscaled, and what the uncertainty levels are within that. The PRA standard guide also establishes provider qualifications for PRA professionals and specialists, which I think just really adds that sense of we can rely on this standard guide as we try to bring transparency to the market. What the PRA is not, this is really important. It is not a resilience certification. It's not a certification like LEED or some other type of building rating system. It's more of a systematic approach for assessment that documents which hazards were identified, how vulnerable the building or proposed design would be, and what the recommended resilience measures are. And as I said a little bit earlier, we specifically do not address transition risks such as energy efficiency or emissions in the guide, although we do collaborate with those considerations, especially in the context of a CPACE project. And as I mentioned, resilience-related certifications such as Fortified would be taken into consideration in the PRA and would definitely help the outcomes of the PRA to be more positive. And I can really see a day in the future where the PRA report is really this place where you collect all the information. You have this document that explains all the resilience measures that are in place, such as a fortified roof, such as wildfire prevention measures, and so on. It would all be in this document, helping everyone, all the stakeholders, make good decisions about the asset.
Hey, Holly, I
Yeah.
wanted to say about that to the program admins that I think it's really important to one, obviously, I think it's great to have that in the guide. Here's who can do these kind of projects, these kind of assessments, but also to say that a lot of those providers that were part of the work group, they, like your organization as well, you also do energy audits, right? So I think that way you're not getting multiple consultants necessarily to accomplish two things. Is
Yeah.
that true?
It
Okay.
does. It needs to be integrated for sure. But like, we just wanted to give a specific home for the physical risk side. But absolutely, especially in the context of CPACE, it should be a collaborative effort, thinking about the energy and water efficiency measures and the resilience measures together. So digging a little deeper on what information is reviewed in each of the stages. In stage 1, we're looking at those hazard maps and climate models to identify which hazards may represent a concern for the site. And then we look at other tools. We don't just take that commercial product and take it at face value. We're also going to dig into other hazard information that might be available locally. Some communities have very advanced sea level rise maps, for instance. They may even have zoning requirements related to that. So it's important that the PRA consultant really dig into, beyond that screening, what else is available. And then visiting the site in the case of existing buildings, or reviewing plans in the case of proposed construction to assess the vulnerability, possible downtime, and damage associated with those hazards that were identified in the prior stage. We're also looking at safety considerations. We're looking at functional recovery timelines. So how long would the property be down is an important piece of information to inform the return on investment of the resilience measure. And material dependencies is where we're looking at, what's the infrastructure that supports this property, whether it be power, water, or so on. And this is another area where it intersects with, let's say there's some part of the CPACE has to do with backup power, renewables. This material dependencies piece would really intersect with that. And then in stage 3, we're talking about the resilience measures if needed, depending on the prior findings. And certainly in the context of CPACE, we'd be looking for those no regrets moves that support the energy efficiency or water efficiency side and also protect against the hazards that were identified. So reducing vulnerability to extreme weather conditions, improving adaptation to the changing climate. So you might have, okay, we know we need to do this for the heating and air conditioning equipment. And let's also keep in mind that heat is expected to rise in this area. So let's choose appropriate equipment, and backup power, of course, as we talked about. So we know that, oh yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, can you
Oh
flip back?
yeah.
So I think it's important to stress, at least from my experience, I guess this is where the rubber hits the road. So once a PRA is done, there's a list of recommended resiliency measures, and all the parties involved in a property sort of get together and decide, okay, what are we going to do about this? Where are we going to spend money to make this property more resilient, more fortified, more secure against climate risk? And it's actually, I found it's a difficult conversation to have. Unlike energy efficiency measures, I mean, to be honest, there's an obvious benefit to making your property more energy efficient. It's often difficult for the parties involved in real estate to understand and appreciate the need to spend money on a building to be more resilient to future hypothetical climate change. I say hypothetical because that's often what people think is an owner will think, why is it really necessary for me to spend $200,000 to make my mechanical equipment more flood proof? I've never had a flood in my mechanical rooms before, and now I'm getting this report that says I'm at risk for that. So it's a difficult, this is the hardest part, I think, of making properties more resilient, is now that you've identified the issues, is actually spending the money. And I think CPACE is a great tool to help in this, but this is where the rubber hits the road, as I said. Yeah.
Thanks, Damien. So the good news is that we know resilience works, and CPACE will play an instrumental role in helping our buildings and therefore our communities become more resilient. And the ASTM PRA is a useful tool to document any hazard concerns and how they're addressed within the project. And of course, providing that standardization and minimum qualifications of professionals and so on. And we do expect this will be helpful in obtaining insurance coverage and tenant negotiations as well. If you have a tenant with a very low tolerance for downtime and you can show them your PRA report, that's helpful. And of course, when selling the asset too down the line. So we have all seen these headlines. It seems like every time there's a big event, we see photos of a house that's remaining standing with everything in devastation around it. And that's where resilience really is a systems-oriented topic. It's great to have a building that is resilient to those hazards, but it would be much better if the entire community was resilient, right? But in these cases here in Florida, that's what they did. They built resilient assets and they withstood these hazard events. So we know it works. We just have to figure out how to fund it. And I think that's where CPACE comes in. So, Abby shared some of this earlier, but many CPACE programs list specific resilience measures. And many measures not necessarily categorized as resilience could also fall into this bucket. For example, water conservation measures are resilience measures associated with drought, right? Energy efficiency measures improve resilience to extreme heat. So there's a lot of intersection between the two areas of what the future hazard conditions might be and the upgrades you might already be making to the building on the energy efficiency side. So talking to the PRA provider can help you figure out how you want to categorize the particular actions. And even if you're not specifically going after resilience, maybe the state program doesn't include it at this time, just be thinking about how the energy efficiency measures will be more thoughtful if you have future climate conditions in mind, such as we mentioned, the potential for extreme heat in the future, and drought as another example. So we'd love to hear from you. Hopefully we have some time for questions. How can we ensure that the PRA supports resilience investment through CPACE? And what questions might you have with on this topic, and how can we be support to you?
Well, thank you very much. I'm just going to really quickly also share my screen, which has all of our information. So I think since we have all three of ours, and then I want to just ask one or two more questions. I really appreciate your time today. And let's see if I can just get this back up. I get down to the last page. So what I wanted to ask is that, do you think, so Holly, as seeing this process the last number of years, is there something like, for example, in Virginia, we have a lot of issues with flooding. So if you're say a capital provider, or Damien, either of you, and you're trying to figure out what's the best way to understand, how this standard works and how to market it. Are there any suggestions you might have, and say, do you want to focus on flooding in Hampton Roads because we have so much of it, or do you want to do wildfire in California, or just any thoughts you have on a way they might be able to start actually marketing to potential end users?
So Abby, I'm trying to understand the question again. So
yeah, sorry,
okay.
Yeah, I put a lot in there. Basically, I was just wondering if what you're seeing, either of you are seeing, or if you have any suggestions on how the capital providers who are, doing a lot of the marketing for CPACE, how they would start immediately looking at this guide and using it to to talk to building owners, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I just spoke with an attorney earlier this week who's helping some high net worth individuals who are building hotels in California. And he was explaining that they love CPACE because these properties do have, some drought concerns, some wildfire concerns, just by virtue of being in Northern California where they're located. Um, and they love CPACE because it's non-recourse, and they really appreciate the lack of a prepayment penalty, if I'm getting all this correct. So, I think if you might be targeting an audience who perhaps they aren't interested in energy efficiency, or maybe climate risk isn't something they're interested in. But I think one thing we can all rally around right now is that natural hazard preparedness makes a lot of sense. You can prevent property damage, you can reduce downtime. Natural hazards are becoming more frequent, more extreme. So, and CPACE is this great capital source. Like Damien is talking about, their borrowers are kind of resistant, like, oh, I don't want to spend the money. But with CPACE, it's more about, how can I look at the opportunity here to make my building stronger, make sure my tenants have, no downtime, and make this building more attractive to investors and tenants utilizing CPACE. So I think it's a real win. And maybe there's an audience out there that's not attracted to the energy side that would be attracted to the natural hazard preparedness.
Yeah, if I could add, I mean, my sense is that most property owners are actually concerned about climate and its impact on their properties. I mean, they have the intention, they would want to do something to make their properties more resilient, for example, to climate issues, climate concerns. But number one, they don't know how to do that. And number two, they're afraid to spend a lot of money on something that they're not sure they need. So the first one of those questions, they don't know how to do that, has been answered with Holly's PRA standard. Now that it's been published, it's a very easy, very simple way, not that expensive, to evaluate a property and determine through the marriage of hazards and vulnerabilities, determine what needs to be done to make that property more resilient. And then, the second is to spend the money. And again, as I said, it perhaps, I think CPACE CPACE finance would be a great tool to help them get over that final hurdle of, again, I think they want to spend some money to make their properties more resilient. They're not sure exactly what to do, but having a vehicle, a financing vehicle that makes it, relatively easy for them to get it done, I think would make a big difference.
And actually, I'm thinking in terms of, as a lender, you're not going to finance buildings without this anymore, right? For the majority of your properties that you own
Yeah,
at that.
yeah. No, that's right.
So, right, it's happening already.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and it's not just us. I mean, well, there's quite a lot of investors and lenders in commercial real estate that are looking at climate risk. And the time for us, the time to look at it is before you close, right? Before you close the deal. So that's why we're getting all this scrutiny done during the due diligence process.
I'm just looking at a few of the questions. Two are from Lisa, who's the program administrator for the city of Philadelphia. And she's asked about whether or not, since they've added resiliency in 2022, should they revisit them with this new standard? And I mean, I don't know, I'll ask you to, I think so, but I would love for you all to, if you think that would make sense as well, to
I
do
mean,
that.
I think it's a great approach, just because it does add consistency, and you're referring to an ASTM standard, which is generally accepted. The ASTM in the environmental site assessment, for instance, as we mentioned earlier, is just ubiquitous across commercial real estate because all the stakeholders know what it is. It's a consensus-based standard. So that's one way to bring consistency to how this is evaluated in your program. And we can share a link to the guide. I don't know if we'll do that after, but we'll
Yeah, we can do that when we share out the slides, because it's something that you do have to pay for. So it's not free, but definitely worth it. It's interesting, I've been sharing with the program admins and some of the capital providers that this is coming. So I am more than excited that this actually is here, because I really think that we're a small industry, and I think if we can all look at using something consistently, it's going to really help all of us, get to more buildings, improve more buildings, in a way that everyone can kind of understand or wrap their heads around. So we don't wonder, well, in this state, they're going to allow this and that, and this person can do it. And then the capital provider goes to another state and they're like, well, okay, but in this state, we could do it this way. Why can't we do it here? And, this kind of thing happens already to some extent, but I think this will really make a big difference having this. Another question was, I'm not sure I understand exactly what they're referring to, but it says, you mentioned not that expensive, but can you quantify? Do either of you know what this
I might have,
person?
I
Yeah,
might
go
have
ahead,
said
David.
that. No, Holly, you're better to answer this question than me. Yeah, I think I might have said it's not that expensive. At least, go ahead, Holly.
Yeah, I guess I would say it's not that expensive in terms of the overall investment that's being made, and I would put it in the same bucket as any of your other kind of due diligence assessments that you're getting on a standard commercial real estate deal. It's within the same range.
Yes.
And in PACE, you can cover these as soft costs, like, so your energy audit, I mean, you're gonna pay it back with, with the total loan amount, but these are, consider, I can't imagine they wouldn't be eligible costs, because every other kind of report is typically eligible, so it'd be put under that category. And of course, the first one, the stage one, is gonna be a lot less than 2 and then 3, but by the time you get to 3, when you're looking at, actually what you're gonna implement, you're gonna be already looking at financing it with CPACE or something else, I'm assuming, right?
Mhm.
At that point.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, that's a great point. I think we should make sure that's one ask for the program administrators is, could they make sure that is one of the types of assessments? I mean, I think it kind of falls under the feasibility or what audit type of an assessment that would be done, but that would be great if it could be qualifying as a soft cost.
Absolutely. And then I think Chris, hi Chris, haven't talked to you in a while. He asked, how are insurers looking at resilient building modifications to older properties? Anyone want
I
to
mean, I
grab?
think it makes a difference. For instance, we worked on a project in Florida, a multifamily project, where the insurer initially was using an older roof age. And once we were able to provide information about the roof modifications that were made that made the building more resilient, one of the buildings more resilient, they were able to get better pricing. So, at the end of the day, the insurers will say, I can't promise you cheaper insurance if you do resilience measures, but insurers need accurate information. They need accurate building component ages, building condition information. And when resilience measures are in place or plan to be in place, that does matter in how the building is going to perform. So it is an important part of their underwriting. And if you work with a good broker, they're going to be marketing this building as an asset that's really been fortified. Damien, were you going to say anything else on that?
Well, even let's say a clean PRA. In other words, a PRA report that comes back saying you don't have to do anything. The property is relatively resilient to this hazard. Even that's valuable. And as Holly said, it's just providing information, perhaps to the insurance carrier that they didn't have. I think it's one of the reasons why stage 2 is important, in our opinion, is you get a lot of information about hazards in stage 1 from the climate models, but not some necessarily good news. It's usually bad news. The property is exposed to these hazards. It's the stage 2 where, after a site assessment, the report can say, well, the property is exposed to this hazard, but they've already done some mitigation measures, or the way they handle their operations, this particular property is not at risk of a loss, whatever. That is good news that can be taken back to the insurance carrier. So even clean PRAs are valuable. It's not just a matter of identifying weaknesses, but identifying strengths as well.
Hey, Damon, how many of the reports, the hundreds you reviewed, have been clean, out of curiosity? Percentage, like more or
Yeah,
less?
yeah, right. Yeah, not too many. But they're out there, and property owners don't necessarily broadcast what they've done. If they spent money already to make their building stronger against physical risk issues, it's not necessarily easily obtained. You have to really get a PRA done to find that out. So it is, you're right, Abby, there's not too many, success stories, great properties from the PRA, but they're out there, and there's no way to know that information without doing the PRA.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I just think that probably there's things that even like I have a background doing as you all know, property condition reports. And so you look at a building, oh, this building's in, it's really new and it's built to LEED standards, or, it's a building code that's pretty advanced. And then when you actually get in there, you still usually identify or can find something that could be
Yeah.
better because of age and maintenance, and maybe things weren't even installed necessarily the way they were supposed to, et cetera. So
Yeah, the outcome of most PRAs is a list of a half a dozen or more, proposed resiliency measures. It's a list, and some are expensive, some are inexpensive, and the ownership and the team has to sort of go through that list and decide which ones we're going to do. Not all of them, but the ones that are most effective. Yeah, so that's sort of somewhere in the middle. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it also, Abby, you mentioned codes, part of the PRA. It's not a code compliance audit by any means, but it is cognizant of what code is and what, in some states, code is very protective, in other states, not at all. And I think that's where CPACE could really come in and serve a need and help get buildings above code.
absolutely. I mean, we certainly, I think, I hate to say it, but I feel like, I know during the work we talked about when there was a collapse of the building in near Miami, I guess. And I just feel like this kind of thing is happening more and more. So I do think it's also more, and it's just weighing on people more, whether they even know it or not, both personally and also in their professional lives and commercial real estate world, I mean, it's not something that seems so, uh, not, it's reality now,
Yeah.
so, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just looking, I think we've answered, let's see, open questions. I pretty much, let's see, I think I've answered all these here. I guess anything else you all want to add? We're almost at the end of our time, and then we'll of course share the slides, share a link to the ASTM guide, and share our contact information. And I would say this is first of all, I just want to say they're an amazing team. Holly and Damien, they've done this a number of times. They're a wealth of information. They're both extremely professionals. I didn't do nearly what they did. I participated as much as I could, but I enjoyed very much being part of that work group. It was a very good experience, and they really know what they're doing. So
thanks, Abby. It's been really fun to talk with you all today. And again, I just would say it's such a huge opportunity for CPACE. I mean, you read the headlines, that natural hazards, increasing property insurance crisis. Even if someone maybe isn't that interested in clean energy right now necessarily, I think resilience is a huge opportunity for CPACE. And the ASTM standard provides a way for you to reference a standardized approach. So hopefully that's a helpful thing. And I meant it when I said the invitation is open. If anyone is interested in joining the task group, at this point, what we're doing is gathering feedback on all the PRAs that are being performed. ASTM standards have to be updated periodically. So we gather feedback and think about future improvements. I could even imagine a CPACE specific PRA guide at some point.
Sure,
So
sure.
please reach out if you're interested in learning more.
well, thanks a lot to both of you. And I hope you have a great rest of the day. And we'll be sending out that information as we discussed. So sign off for now. Thanks a lot for everyone joining. Appreciate it.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Abby.